right, so today we're diving into the world of G.K. Chesterton, specifically some of his really fiery essays and poems. And this guy...
He's something else.
He was something else.
Yeah.
He really was. You know, he was writing in the early 1900s, but it's like he could see the craziness of our modern world coming, you know? He predicted mega corporations and even the wild ways we consume information today.
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't just some kind of fortune teller who could see into the future. He was more like a societal X-ray technician.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was using his wit and this really sharp writing to expose the bones of our cultural structure.
I like that.
Yeah.
The societal X-ray technician.
Yeah.
So let's X-ray some of his ideas here. One of the things that really jumped out at me was this idea of the Utopia of Usurers.
Oh, yeah.
What do you even...
Catchy.
I know what a phrase, right?
I love.
It sounds kind of nice at first, right? Like some kind of
Right.
utopia. Yeah, some kind of strange paradise. But it's actually a warning about unchecked capitalism.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, be careful what you wish for, because this whole idea of progress and prosperity, it can be easily twisted, right?
Right.
He really believed that if we let the pursuit of profit just run wild, it would create this world where everything is for sale. Even things like beauty and art and, those things that make life worth living.
Right. Like imagine a world where the most famous artists are the ones creating the slickest ads.
Yeah.
Not the ones who are challenging us or, moving us deeply with their art.
Right. And the thing is, he wasn't talking about some distant dystopia,
Right.
He saw this happening in his own time with the rise of advertising and, mass production.
It's so interesting how we connected those things.
Yeah.
Because we often think of them as separate issues.
Yeah. And this is where I think his concept of the servile state comes into play.
Okay. The servile state. What is that?
So it's not about chains and shackles, like traditional slavery.
Okay.
It's more like this subtle form of control. He was saying that we can end up being so reliant on big businesses and the government that we actually lose our individual agency. We trade our freedom for the illusion of security and comfort.
And that reminds me of something else Chesterton talked about, the illusion of choice.
Oh.
He argued that just because we can vote, it doesn't automatically mean we're actually free.
Especially if the options are already being controlled by a powerful few.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like we're choosing from a menu, but someone else has already decided what's on it.
Exactly. And he saw this happening in England, with the expansion of voting rights.
Okay.
At first glance, it seems like progress, right?
Right.
More people get to vote.
Right, more voices are being heard.
But he was more cynical.
Yeah.
He thought it was sometimes being used as a way to pacify people,
Ow!
create this appearance of progress while the real power structure stayed the same.
So it's like this distraction technique to
Right.
keep people from focusing on the real issues.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so if this is the problem, what's the solution? Did Chesterton think we needed some kind of revolution?
Well, he was actually pretty skeptical of rebellion, just for the sake of rebelling.
Why?
Yeah, he felt like just calling yourself a rebel was kind of meaningless and might even help the people in power.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, it's easy to get caught up in the idea of being against something without actually offering a real alternative.
I see.
Yeah.
So what did he offer as an alternative?
Well, instead of just raging against the machine, he wanted people to hold the engineers accountable.
I like that.
Yeah.
Hold the engineers accountable. What did he mean by that?
He really believed in personal responsibility. Whether you're a politician or a businessman or anyone else in a position of power, you have to answer for your actions. He wanted people to see through the smoke and mirrors of empty promises and demand something better. Hold those in power accountable.
That's so interesting because it kind of goes against the grain of how we often think about social change, right? We often think about protesting, big movements, but he's saying it starts with holding individuals responsible.
Yeah, and it's not just about tearing down the existing system.
Right.
It's about building something better in its place.
Okay.
And that requires clear thinking and clear communication.
And that actually brings me to another thing I found fascinating about Chesterton. His love of simplicity.
Oh, totally.
Especially when it comes to language.
Oh, he couldn't stand it when intellectuals and these reformers would hide behind all this complicated jargon.
It's like they were trying to make it impossible for everyday people to understand what they were actually saying.
Exactly. It's like they were trying to monopolize knowledge and keep it for themselves.
So it's like he wanted to democratize knowledge in a way.
Yeah, give everyone the tools to think critically and challenge the status quo.
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
He was all about empowering the individual.
And speaking of challenging the status quo,
where?
We have to talk about Chesterton's humor because this guy was a master of wit and satire.
Oh, absolutely.
And he used it to expose hypocrisy and make people really think twice about what they were being told.
Yeah, his humor was like a weapon, but a really fun weapon.
Right.
He can make you laugh and make you think at the same time.
It's like he understood that sometimes you need a scalpel instead of a hammer to get your point across.
Exactly. He was a surgeon of satire.
I like that. A surgeon of satire.
Yeah.
So he was using humor to cut through the BS.
Exactly. And to make people more receptive to these challenging ideas.
It's like he's saying, look, if we can laugh at this, maybe we can start to see through it and demand something better.
Exactly.
And he even argued for the revival of the court jester.
Oh, yeah.
That figure who could speak truth to power through humor.
Without losing their head, hopefully.
Right, hopefully. I love that he saw the value in that kind of like subversive wit.
Yeah, me too.
Like, it's almost like he's saying that humor can be a form of resistance.
Absolutely. And he was a master of it.
So one of the sharpest examples of his wit, I think, is his essay on Sir Edward Carson.
Oh, yes. Sir Edward Carson, the Irish Unionist leader.
Right. And Chesterton uses this real-life figure to really dissect the hypocrisy he saw in the political landscape of his time.
It's brilliant how he does that.
It is?
He takes this politician who had these seemingly contradictory views on law and order, and he just uses him to expose the absurdity of the whole system.
Right. It's like he's holding up a magnifying glass to this seemingly small problem.
Right.
And then you realize it's actually a symptom of this much larger disease.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Chesterton was a master at diagnosing those societal diseases.
He really was. And what blows me away is how relevant his diagnoses still are today.
I know. It's like he was writing about our world, even though he lived over a century ago.
It's incredible, right? Like the things he was talking about, the influence of big money on politics, the seductive power of consumerism, the erosion of individual freedom in the name of security.
It's all still happening.
It's all still happening right before our eyes.
Yeah.
It's kind of eerie, actually.
It is a bit eerie.
Like how spot on he was.
Yeah.
About the trajectory of society.
Yeah, it's the mark of a true visionary, I think.
Right.
To be able to see those timeless human struggles that just transcend any particular era.
Yeah.
And one of those struggles, which he was really good at articulating, was this battle against the control of information.
Yes. And he wrote about that extensively in his essay, The Empire of the Ignorant.
Right.
And, you know, it's interesting because he wasn't just talking about censorship in the traditional sense.
Right.
It was more about how those usurers he warned us about can manipulate information to stay in control.
It's like they're spoon-feeding us this carefully curated version of reality.
Right. And we just eat it up.
We do.
Because it's easy and it's comfortable.
We do. Exactly.
Yeah.
He was saying that the ruling class, those who benefit from the servile state, they need to keep the masses intellectually dependent.
Wow.
And burning books isn't really that effective.
Right.
It's much more effective to shape the narratives, control the flow of information,
right,
and even make us believe that we're making free choices when really we're just choosing from a pre-approved menu.
And that is chilling.
It is.
Especially when you think about how much information we're bombarded with today. I mean, we've got the 24/7 news cycle,
right,
social media algorithms.
Yeah.
It's like we're drowning in data, but we're starving for real knowledge.
It's information overload without the nourishment of wisdom.
Wow. That's good. That's really good.
Yeah.
Information overload without the nourishment of wisdom.
Yeah.
What's the antidote to that?
Well, I think Chesterton, being such a champion of clear thinking and simple language,
right,
he would say, we need to actually engage with ideas.
Okay.
Not just passively consume them.
Engage.
Yeah. Don't just scroll and
right,
actually think critically about what you're reading.
Right.
Question everything. Seek out diverse perspectives. Don't just stay in your little echo chamber.
He's basically saying use your brain.
Exactly.
Right.
And your brain is a muscle. You have to exercise it.
I like that. So true knowledge isn't something that you just passively receive.
Mm-hmm.
It's something you have to actively wrestle with and extract from the chaos of the world.
And that takes effort.
It does.
It's worth it.
It is. It's like he's saying we need to be more intentional about how we consume information.
Yes, exactly. He wanted people to be intellectually independent, able to see through all the propaganda and manipulation that often tries to pass itself off as progress or enlightenment.
Because it's so easy to get swept up in that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with how quickly information spreads now.
Exactly.
It's like you said, information overload.
Right. So how do we become more discerning? How do we develop that Chestertonian skepticism?
Well, I think he'd say start by questioning everything.
Okay.
Don't just accept things at face value. Dig a little deeper. Look for the hidden agendas, the underlying assumptions.
And he didn't just see this happening in, like, politics or the media, right? He saw it everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. He saw it in art and science and religion.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. He saw these experts hiding behind their jargon, making their fields inaccessible to the average person.
It's like they were building these walls around knowledge.
Exactly. And he wanted to tear those walls down.
Democratize knowledge.
Exactly. He wanted to empower everyone to engage in these big, important conversations.
Yeah.
You know, the conversations that shape our world.
And he really believed that everyone had the capacity for that kind of critical thinking.
Oh, absolutely. He didn't think it was something reserved for the elite or the highly educated. He thought it was something inherent in being human.
It's like he's saying, don't let them tell you what to think. Use your own mind, use your own judgment, and come to your own conclusions.
And he practiced what he preached. He was constantly challenging his own assumptions.
Really?
Yeah, he was constantly engaging with opposing viewpoints. He wasn't afraid of disagreement. He actually welcomed it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, he saw it as an opportunity for growth, for deeper understanding. You know that old saying, iron sharpens iron?
Yeah.
He believed that intellectual friction could actually lead to a sharper, more refined understanding of the world.
And that's something I think we've lost sight of a bit today. You know, with social media and everything, it's so easy to just surround yourself with people who agree with you.
Oh, it's so easy to get stuck in that echo chamber.
Right. But Chesterton would say that's actually the opposite of what we should be doing.
Yeah, he'd say that's the danger zone. Because if we're not challenging our beliefs, if we're not exposing ourselves to different perspectives, then we're not really growing.
Right. We're just becoming more entrenched in our own biases.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's not how you get to the truth.
So how do we break out of that echo chamber? How do we start having those difficult conversations, especially in today's world where it feels like everyone is so polarized?
Well, I think the first step is just being aware of it. You know, recognizing that we all have biases and that we're all susceptible to this kind of echo chamber effect.
Okay.
And then from there, it's about being intentional about seeking out diverse perspectives. You know, reading things that challenge our worldview, talking to people who have different opinions, and most importantly, listening, really listening, not just waiting for our turn to talk.
And I think that takes a certain amount of humility, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It takes humility to admit that we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
That we might be wrong about some things, and that's okay.
It is okay to be wrong sometimes.
It's more than okay. It's essential, because if we're not willing to be wrong, then we're not really open to learning and growing.
And I think that's something that Chesterton really embodied, you know, this willingness to be wrong, this humility. He was a brilliant guy, obviously.
Yeah.
But he never came across as arrogant or condescending.
No, he was always willing to admit when he didn't know something or when he had changed his mind about something. Yeah. And he saw that as a strength, not a weakness.
It's like he understood that the pursuit of truth is a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And sometimes the journey takes you down some unexpected paths, and you have to be willing to adjust your course along the way.
Which brings me to something else I wanted to ask you about. His critique of the eugenics movement.
Oh, yeah. That was a big one for him.
It was. And it's something that's really unsettling to read about today.
Oh, absolutely. It's a dark chapter in human history.
It really is. But what I find so fascinating is how Chesterton saw through the so-called scientific veneer of eugenics and recognized it for what it really was, a dangerous and dehumanizing ideology.
He saw how the allure of scientific certainty, you know, this idea that we can engineer a better world through science, it can be very seductive.
Right, because it appeals to our desire for order and control.
Exactly. And he saw how that desire for order and control could be easily twisted, how it could be used to justify all sorts of horrors in the name of progress.
And that's what's so scary about eugenics, right? It was presented as this progressive scientific movement.
Right. It was all about improving the human race through selective breeding.
But at its core, it was deeply dehumanizing.
Absolutely. Because it reduced human beings to mere specimens. You know, objects to be studied and manipulated. And it stripped away their individuality, their dignity, their inherent worth as human beings.
And that's something that Chesterton was always fighting against, this idea that we can reduce human beings to some kind of formula or equation.
He understood that human beings are far too complex for that, too unpredictable, too messy.
Right. We're not robots. We're not machines.
Exactly. And he believed that any attempt to control or engineer human behavior on a grand scale was not only misguided, but also incredibly dangerous.
Because it ignores the inherent dignity of the individual.
Exactly. And the fact that we're all created in the image of God.
Which brings me to something else I wanted to touch on Chesterton's faith, because it was such an integral part of his life and his work.
Oh, absolutely. His faith was central to his entire being. It permeated everything he did.
So how do you see his faith influencing his writing, his social commentary, his views on things like eugenics?
Well, I think it gave him a very particular lens through which to view the world. He saw the world as a place of wonder, a place of beauty, a place full of these amazing, flawed, contradictory human beings who were all created in the image of God.
And that's a really beautiful way to see the world.
It is. And it gave his writing this incredible sense of joy, even when he was tackling some really difficult and depressing subjects.
Right, because even in the midst of all the darkness and the ugliness, he never lost sight of the inherent goodness of humanity.
Exactly. And he never lost hope. He always believed that things could get better, that we could create a more just and compassionate world.
And he really believed in the power of individuals to make a difference.
He did. He believed that even small acts of kindness and courage could have a ripple effect, that they could inspire others to do the same, and that eventually those ripples can turn into waves of change.
I love that. And I think that's a really hopeful message, especially today when it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by all the negativity in the world.
It is.
Yeah.
But Chesterton reminds us that we're not powerless, that we all have a role to play in making the world a better place.
And he did it all with such wit and style.
He did. He was a master of language.
Yeah.
And he knew how to use it to make people think, to make them laugh, and to make them feel something.
Well, he's a true original.
He was a one of a kind.
A giant of his time.
Absolutely.
You know, it's funny, as we've been talking about all this, I can't help but think about our own relationship with information today. I mean, we're constantly bombarded with news and opinions, and
it's overwhelming.
It really is. It's like information overload on steroids.
It's like that 24/7 news cycle Chesterton was worried about times 1,000.
Right, exactly. And then you add in social media, and it's just this constant stream of headlines and hot takes. And
everyone's trying to grab your attention, get you to click on their article or watch their video.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And I think it's making it harder and harder to actually think deeply about anything.
Oh, absolutely. Because you're constantly being pulled in a million different directions.
Right, exactly. And so you end up just skimming the surface of things.
Yeah, you're not really engaging with the ideas anymore.
Right, you're just consuming them.
Exactly, and then spitting them back out.
Without really digesting them.
Right, it's like intellectual junk food.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Intellectual junk food. We're stuffing ourselves with empty calories.
And then we wonder why we feel so intellectually sluggish.
And bloated.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's the antidote? How do we break free from this cycle of information overload and intellectual junk food?
Well, I think Chesterton would say we need to be more intentional about what we consume. Just like we try to eat healthy foods and exercise our bodies.
Okay.
We need to exercise our minds. And that means being more selective about what we read and watch and listen to.
So it's not just about consuming less information.
Right. It's about consuming better information.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we become more discerning consumers of information?
Well, I think one important step is to cultivate a healthy skepticism.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
I mean, don't just accept everything you read or hear at face value.
Okay.
Question everything. Ask yourself, who's writing this? Why are they writing it? What are their biases? What are they not telling me?
So basically become an investigative journalist.
Exactly. Be your own editor.
I like that. Be your own editor. So we need to be more critical of the information that's coming at us.
Yes. And we also need to be more proactive about seeking out diverse perspectives.
Okay, so not just staying in our own little echo chambers.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get stuck in those echo chambers, especially online,
where
you're constantly being shown content that aligns with your existing beliefs.
Right. It's like the algorithms are designed to keep us in our own little bubbles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to make a conscious effort to break out of that bubble, to seek out viewpoints that challenge your own, to read things that make you uncomfortable.
Because that's how we grow.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how we learn.
And you know what? I think that's something that Chesterton was really good at. He was always engaging with ideas that he disagreed with.
Oh, absolutely. He was never afraid of a good debate.
Right. He actually seemed to relish it.
He did. He loved to argue, but he always did it with this sense of playfulness and respect for the other person.
Yeah. He never took himself too seriously.
Exactly. And I think that's something else that's really important to remember. We can be serious about ideas without taking ourselves too seriously.
Right. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure this thing out together.
Exactly. We're all on this journey together. And it's a lot more fun if we can laugh along the way.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it for today.
Yeah, I think so too.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into the mind of G.K. Chesterton.
He was a brilliant mind.
He really was. And you know what? I think his work is more relevant today than ever.
I completely agree.
He had this incredible ability to see through the noise and the chaos of his time and identify these timeless truths about human nature and the human condition.
He was a true visionary.
He was. And I think his work can still teach us a lot about how to live in the world today.
Absolutely. He challenges us to think critically, to engage with different perspectives, to be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers, and most importantly, to never lose our sense of wonder and joy.
Beautifully said. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining me for this depth dive.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of G.K. Chesterton alive.